I really appreciate everyone's attendance. And as you heard, this is being recorded, so just be aware of that. And welcome. Citizens Action Coalition here to talk about the rate hike recently filed by AES Indiana, the utility that serves the city of Indianapolis and Marion County. And what you need to know about the rate case and what you need to know to, push back. Just a quick slider about the agenda, just a quick introduction and some background that I'll be giving, and then we'll be turning it over to Ben for an overview of the rate case. And we're going to talk about how folks can take action. And at the end, we'll also do Q&A. So if you have questions, please punch those in the Q&A section, and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. There'll be three of us here with Citizens Action Coalition talking to you this evening. My name is Kerwin Olson. I'm the Executive Director at Citizens Action Coalition. We'll also be joined by Ben Inskeep, our Program Director, who will do the heavy lifting related to discussing the ins and outs and the deets of what AES has proposed before the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. And then we'll have Kelly Hamman also join us, our Director of Development, to talk about how to take action and things you can do and wrap things up. Yeah, well, just a quick background. We're Citizens Action Coalition, Indiana's oldest and largest consumer and environmental advocacy organization, generally referred to as the Utility Watchdog Group. We do, most of our work for the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, IURC, fighting on behalf of residential consumers. We also cross the street and, work across at the State House on legislation and policy related to consumer issues, healthcare, pollution, sometimes agriculture, and other issues. And, as always, we rely on our members and support from folks like you to be able to, to do our work. We organize at the grassroots level. There's a picture of our program organizer lead, Bryce. We obviously work down the State House on legislative advocacy, and we do a lot of work like this, regulatory advocacy, and educating and informing the public and communities about what's going on before the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. And just wanted to point out some of the resources that we have related to this case. We do have a specific web page on our website dedicated to the AES Indiana rate hike. There's the link right here. We will be posting this presentation on that web page, as well as a recording of the webinar will be posted to our YouTube channel. If you haven't checked out our YouTube channel, we got a lot of content there, various hearings, webinars, and other things that we've archived for everybody to see on our YouTube channel. And then, of course, please sign up for our emails on our website so you can stay informed about what we're working on, what you need to know, and how you can take action on issues of importance. Yeah, I'm just going to give some quick background on the Indiana General Assembly and the laws and policies that govern energy policy and utilities here in the state. First bullet point here is, unfortunately, our state here in Indiana, we lack, meaningful electric utility affordability programs and meaningful consumer protections. For example, we have no electric low income rate statewide that provides, a hand up, some help for low income, fixed income customers that struggle paying their utility bills. We've got nothing here in Indiana statewide that supports low income and vulnerable populations in affording their essential human services such as electricity. We have very, very few protections from disconnection or loss of service. We believe strongly here at Citizens Action Coalition that all inhabitants of the state of Indiana, all Hoosiers, should have access to affordable and essential and uninterrupted essential human services. And unfortunately, beyond a winter disconnect moratorium for LIHEAP qualified households during the winter months, that's about it. We lack any meaningful protections for disconnections here in Indiana. And of course, we all remember the bad legislation at the State House that repealed the Midwest's strongest energy efficiency standard adopted under prior governor, Mitch Daniels, as well as the canceling of the Energizing Indiana program and undermining rooftop solar and other renewables by eliminating and statutorily prohibiting net metering here in the state of Indiana. So they've done a good job eliminating consumers' ability to control their costs and control their energy cost usage and make some choices. And the General Assembly has had policy after policy after policy that has severely undermined affordability by authorizing many what are known as utility bill trackers or surcharges or riders. Those are those fees that pop up on everybody's utility bills that allow utility companies to raise your rates, raise your bills without filing rate cases outside the context of a general base rate case. Of course, now we have big tech data centers, rearing their heads here in Indiana, and our General Assembly has gone out of their way to subsidize big tech through driving power prices higher, whether it's subsidizing them through sales tax exemption or forcing customers to pay 20% of the cost with lacking any other meaningful protections for customers. 20% of billions of dollars is a lot of money. They remove the discretion and flexibility and authority of regulators, with bills that say the commission shall approve, for example, that eliminates the ability of the commission to do their primary function. Primary function of the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission is to act as a surrogate to competition, to investor-owned monopoly utilities. That is their role to play, the economic regulator, keep utilities in check, and the more legislation that they pass that all but mandate regulators to approve and rubber stamp these rate increases, the less discretion regulators have and the less ability they have to do their job, which is effectively that surrogate to competition. And then lastly, we have a General Assembly that year after year has refused to consider pro-consumer legislation put forth by legislators that do good things for consumers, that protect consumers from disconnections, that provide bill relief programs, that help consumers. They don't even give those bills hearings in committees. And a shout out to some of the legislators here in Marion County that represent a lot of you folks on this call today that operate here at AES Indiana Service Territory. Senator Jackson, Senator Hundley, Representative Pryor, Representative Hamilton, especially those four, have put forth policies before the General Assembly that the respective chairs of Senate and House utilities have simply refused to hear. So unfortunately, we have policies in the state that are far too tilted in advantage of the utilities, make it far easier and far quicker for utilities to raise rates, and don't afford any protections for consumers from the monopoly greed that is inherent in their operations. And then lastly, what has the result been from year after year seeing pro-utility legislation passed before the General Assembly? We sent out a press release last week talking about, between July 2024 and July 2025, we noticed historic bill hikes for ratepayers across the state of Indiana. All four corners, all 92 counties hit with the largest rate increase that CAC has seen in at least 20 years, with the average increase being $28 a month for ratepayers throughout the state. Largest of those increases being up in Northwest Indiana from NIPSCO, where those customers got hit with $50 a month. CenterPoint customers down in Evansville, southwest part of the state, $44 a month increase. Duke Energy, Indiana's largest electric utility that serves the greater part of central Indiana, the donut counties around Indiana, those customers have realized a $26 a month increase year over year. And then AES Indiana right here, of course, $17 a month from 2024 to 2025, a 12% increase. And guess what? They're asking for even more. And then even I&M up in Northeast Indiana, serving South Bend, Muncie, Fort Wayne, those areas, those ratepayers have seen a $6 a month increase just in the last 12 months. And again, as we've seen, that is the largest average increase that we've seen in at least 2 decades, potentially ever. But we didn't analyze data going all the way back. We just looked at the last 20 years and we're shocked by what we've seen. And that really is largely, from our perspective, the underlying cause here being the undue outsized influence of these deep-pocketed monopoly electric and gas utilities before legislators that year after year after year passed favorable legislation for utilities, refusing to hear good legislation that helps consumers. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. But I think it's important in the context of what Ben is about to discuss, that a lot of this stuff, was enabled by statute, by authority of the Indiana General Assembly. And again, the result of worsening what we see as a critical affordability crisis for Hoosier consumers. About 1 in 4 can't afford to pay their energy bill on time. Everybody knows the 211 call line for help, where folks can call in looking for resources and help when they're struggling for needs, utility assistance. Number 2 reason people call 211. More people are calling 211 for help with their utility bills than calling for food, for healthcare, for transportation, or jobs. Calling 211 because they can't pay their utility bills. And looking back at the first 6 months just of this year, AES Indiana, disconnect notices to effectively half of their households, 214,000 customers, disconnected 21,000 households for unpaid bills in the first 6 months, and sent 40,000 residential accounts to collection agencies, including 37,000 in June. Imagine that, sending an unpaid utility bill that you can't afford to a collection agency. Obviously, you can't afford the bill, you're struggling financially, they're digging you even further by reporting that delinquency, their electric bill, to a credit agency. And we find behavior and activity like that just unthinkable and immoral. And with that, I will turn it over to our program director, Ben Inskeep, who's fully reviewed this case, done a lot of work, and is going to talk about what the heck's going on here in this case. So take it away, Ben.
Well, thank you very much, Kerwin, and good evening, everybody. I'm glad to be with you tonight. I want to kick off my discussion about the rate case by just table setting here, talking just a little bit about our utility here in the Indianapolis area, AES Indiana. AES is an electric-only utility here in Indianapolis, so they only provide electric service, and they do that to about 530,000 customers here in central Indiana. Recall that a customer could include multiple folks living in that household, so that's not a perfect correlation to the number of people that are actually being served and affected by AES Indiana's rate increase. AES Indiana is owned by a parent company called IPALCO, and that in turn is owned by majority owner AES Corporation, which owns 70% effectively of AES Indiana. The minority owner, CDPQ, is an investor that manages public pensions in Quebec, Canada. So part of our utility is owned by this public pension manager in Canada. AES Indiana is formerly known as Indianapolis Power and Light. They were acquired by AES a couple decades ago and went through the rebranding a few years ago. So that's why we have AES Indiana now here in central Indiana. And we'll get into the details here shortly, but AES Indiana collects about $1.6 billion every year from customers here in central Indiana. So we're talking big money every year coming out of central Indiana to go to AES. And pictured here, we see one of AES's power plants, their natural gas power plant, Eagle Valley, down in the Martinsville area. So AES filed this rate case at the beginning of June in front of the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. That's our utility regulator in the state of Indiana. Their job is to act as the surrogate for competition because our monopoly utilities don't have competition. By law, there is not another provider. And so as a result, they must go before a regulator in order to change their rates. So that's what they've done here. They come to the regulator to ask for permission to increase these rates. But these proposals are not set in stone. They're just merely proposals at this moment in time. So what I'm going to be talking about in my presentation are not necessarily things that are guaranteed to happen. And we still have a voice as consumers to oppose rate increases and propose better alternatives than what AES has suggested here today. At a high level, this case is going to determine three main things. First is how much money can AES rates be designed to collect from customers every year. That's called the revenue requirement. So we figure out how much money can they collect from customers, what's fair to AES to pay them back for the cost of service, plus give them an opportunity to earn a profit. The second thing is cost allocation. How do we spread out that big bucket of costs across different types of customers? Residential customers, commercial customers, and industrial customers. That matters a lot If that is being spread out in an unfair way, it can mean residential customers can be hit with a much higher bill than they should be, or that is fair. And finally, it's rate design. How do we actually figure out how customers are going to pay back the utility for the portion of costs that they owe them? This would be the specific charges that we pay on our bill. So what's not part of this case? I think it's important to also identify some things that are not going to be at play in this case, so we know how to focus our advocacy to get the outcomes we want. First of all, our natural gas, water, or other types of utility bills that are not our electric bill are not at play in this case. So those are not rate increases that are pertinent to this AES Indiana case. That's only going to impact our electric utility bill. Second thing I want to mention is that AES conducts a resource planning process to figure out what sources of power should we pursue in order to meet Central Indiana's needs. So those decisions occur in the AES Indiana's integrated resource planning process. That's ongoing right now, and it has a public stakeholder process. So if that's of interest to you, please do check it out. You can Google AES Indiana IRP and find their website and resources to get involved there. Finally, we are not here to change Indiana's laws and regulations in this specific case. Our advocacy does include advocating for good consumer protections, both in terms of regulations and in front of the General Assembly. But in this specific case, this will not be addressing those types of changes. So we're going to be focused on what our current laws and regulations are and advocating accordingly. So let's talk first about that revenue requirement. Again, that's how much money can AES Indiana collect from us as customers every year. Currently, AES collects about $1.6 billion from Central Indiana for their electric service, and they're proposing quite a large increase, up to $2.1 billion by 2027. Overall, that's about a $468 million increase in the annual amount of money they're collecting from us here in the Indianapolis region. That's about almost 29% increase in their total revenue in a very short amount of time. Now, what makes up this large bucket of $468 million in additional revenue for AES? Two things. First, you have a bucket of costs that have already been pre-approved by the Utility Commission in other cases that have happened over the last year or two. So this would include certain power plant projects that AES has already gotten commission approval for, and certain grid infrastructure projects. So even if this rate case was not proposed by AES, according to AES's math, their rates would still be going up through tracker mechanisms, or those bill surcharges, by $275 million by 2027, or 16.7% out of that 28.5% total increase we're experiencing. In this rate case here, AES has come forth with another bucket of costs they want to add on top of those already pre-approved rate increases. This bucket of costs totals $192 million per year of extra revenue that AES would like to collect from us. It's an 11.7% increase, and that might be the figure you've seen reported in some news stories. Now, this $192 million increase that AES is proposing would happen in two phases. The first part of the increase would hit customer bills by April of next year, and then the full rest of the increase would happen by January of 2027, so about a year and a half from now. A lot of the stuff I'll be talking about today is going to be focused on that full effect of what happens by January of 2027 when all of these rate increases hit our bills combined. So I'll be going through that here shortly. But before I do so, I do want to talk about that cost allocation piece. We have the total amount that AES wants to collect from customers, the total increase, but how does it want to split it up between different types of customers? It doesn't want to do so equally. So while the overall increase is 11.7%, different customer groups are going to be charged a different percentage rate hike in this case. Unfortunately, AES has proposed the largest rate increases for residential customers here in Indianapolis, while giving commercial customers a smaller increase, and industrial customers an even smaller increase, only 2 to 4% increase or so for those industrial customers. So part of our advocacy in this case is to make sure residential customers aren't being treated unfairly and aren't being asked to pay more than their fair share of these costs that AES Indiana wants to collect from us. And I should note that even if Every last dollar that AES Indiana has requested in that last slide, and all those rate increases are fair and appropriate, we could still very well have very strong disagreements with them about who should pay those costs. That's a really important part of the rate case too. So it's not just how much money they're trying to get in addition, but also are they fairly distributing it across their different types of customers. Let's look at how our residential bills have changed over time, going back 6 years on the far left of this graph, forward to today in the middle, and then you see the dotted hashed line out to the right showing future projections of how bills would change if AES's rate increase in this case is approved. What we can see from this graph is that our bills have gone up already pretty significantly, and that under this rate increase proposal, they would go up quite a bit more. Relative to where we were when AES filed this case just a couple months ago, bills are going to be going up about $30 per month by January of 2027. If you look at the three and a half year period between July of 2023 and January of 2027, that's a $55 per month or 41% bill increase for the typical household here in Indianapolis using about 1,000 kilowatt hours per month. That's a huge amount. And like Kerwin pointed out, these are some pretty unprecedented bill increases that utilities like AES Indiana have been proposing and getting approved by our commission. When you look at how that math pencils out on an annual basis, that's more than a 10% increase on an annual basis year after year that we're seeing in this short amount of time. Now, that's much higher than inflation, much higher than a lot of other costs are rising. And that's a problem because this is an essential service. So let's dive into some more details here on the next slide about how our charges, the specific charges we pay on our bills that make up the total bill are changing because these components matter too. I like to think about the types of charges our utilities have in place in kind of two large buckets. We have the base rates that are stable over time and only change through this type of a rate case proceeding in front of the commission. And then we have a separate bucket of costs called trackers. Those are those the surcharges that utilities are allowed to put on our bills as a result of some of those policies that have been enacted by the General Assembly. Those would include things like surcharges for certain grid infrastructure upgrades, power plants, fuel charges, and so on. When we look at our base rates, in this case, AES Indiana is proposing to increase the monthly fixed charge that's currently $17 for most families and increase it up to $20 per month. That's an 18% increase. This would be the largest fixed charge of any investor-owned utility in the state of Indiana. In fact, that $17 already is the largest, I believe, in the state of Indiana for our investor-owned utilities. AES also charges us variable charges based on how much electricity we consume each month. The first set of electricity we consume each month, the first 500 kilowatt hours, is charged at a higher price, 12.5 cents per kilowatt hour today. AES wants to significantly increase that by 30%, up to about 16.3 cents per kilowatt hour by January of 2027. There's also, after you use that first block of energy, that first 500 kilowatt hours during your monthly billing period, energy is charged at a slightly lower rate, 11.3 cents currently. And AES wants to bump that up to more than 15 cents per kilowatt hour, a 33% increase. Not shown on the slide is that for some customers who have electric space heating, as opposed to, for example, a natural gas furnace, those customers might also have a third tier of energy charges that are also that proceed down just a little bit lower as well. Finally, on this, we see trackers, those bill surcharges. In between rate cases, they fluctuate and are often increasing gradually over time or increasing suddenly over time. But in a rate case, the utility often takes those costs that are being collected through those surcharges and puts them into the base rates. And that's what we're seeing here. We see that surcharge is over a cent per kilowatt hour now, but it's dropping to only a fraction of a cent in this rate case. Those costs are not disappearing, but rather they're being incorporated into the charges above the base rates. The overall flaws we see in this rate design, I mentioned the highest fixed charge, which takes control away from your ability to control your bill, and also disincentivizes things like energy efficiency and rooftop solar because it reduces the payback period. for those types of investments. The declining block charge is also an antiquated rate design that does not reflect costs, how costs are caused by customers, and does not provide a good price signal to customers to encourage energy efficiency. And finally, we're concerned that there's no multifamily rate, or as Kerwin mentioned, there's no low-income rate in the state of Indiana. But also AES Indiana has not proposed any specific low-income programs or other programs to help customers improve their affordability, particularly given the very large increases that they're requesting in this case. Now, there are many individual factors driving rates higher, but I think they're all connected, or many at least are connected, to what Kerwin mentioned at the top of the hour regarding the fact that we have a situation where our General Assembly has passed a lot of laws that are very favorable to the utilities and very not favorable to us as consumers. And this has allowed our utilities to raise costs on a number of different fronts. So the first on this list here is the higher profit margin that AES is requesting in this case, which I'll get into in more detail in a subsequent slide here. But that's one of the major factors driving our bills higher, is that our utilities want more and more profit for their shareholders, and that money comes out of our pockets. Now, energy guzzling data centers are also causing price spikes across the country, and we're no exception here in central Indiana. We have a lot of data center proposals in the state, and AES is considering several that we'll talk about later. But these data centers use so much power, they are creating a dynamic that are driving prices higher for all sorts of new power investments, because the strain they're putting on the grid in a very short amount of time cannot keep up with the supply. Coal ash cleanup costs are also a factor in this case. AES is planning to spend about $140 million to clean up legacy coal ash landfills and ponds at its power plants this year and next year. These are costs that represent a mess that AES created because it imprudently stored this toxic coal ash on its site and didn't do so in a safe manner. This coal ash has been sitting there and leaching into toxic constituents from that coal ash, leaches into our groundwater, and utilities are now being required to clean up some of these legacy messes that they've created. But they don't want their shareholders to pay for it. They want you to pay for it and me to pay for it. So that's another issue in this case that we're concerned about, is these coal ash cleanup costs and who should be paying for them. I mentioned the shifting costs between commercial and industrial customers versus residential customers earlier, in talking about the fairness of the AES proposal to impose the highest rate increases on the residential customers and lower rate increases on their commercial and industrial customers. Fuel costs are also at play. While AES is reducing the costs of coal, in fact, they're phasing out all of their coal-fired power plants by the end of next year, the cost of natural gas is increasing, and their reliance on natural gas is also increasing. So we have concerns about the high costs of fuel as AES replaces one fossil fuel with another fossil fuel. And unfortunately, natural gas price volatility is even more extreme than coal prices. So there's more potential for those prices to fluctuate considerably in the future. New investments in renewable energy and battery storage are also at play here too. AES has done a reasonably good job at transitioning to some of their generation fleet to cleaner sources, including solar and wind, as well as battery storage. And so some of those investments are now coming online and being incorporated into rates as well. AES is also, as I mentioned, they're phasing out their coal use. And so the last two coal-fired power plant units at their Petersburg generating station are going to be switched from coal to natural gas fired. And that doesn't involve over $100 million of investments to make that transition. And so those are costs that are being incorporated into rates as well. And then finally, we'll get into more detail soon, but transmission and distribution spending on the grid is also soaring and is also a major driver of rate increases recently as well. I want to talk just a little bit more about that. The first bullet point from the last slide, the higher profits that AES Indiana is requesting in this case. Currently, AES gets an authorized return on equity or profit margin for their shareholders of about 9.9%. That's what's built into our current rates. They want to increase that percentage up to 10.7%. Now, that might sound small. It's less than a 1% increase or one percentage point increase, but that has a big impact because it's being multiplied by billions of dollars in their rate base. In fact, this small change in their return on equity gives AES an extra $27.4 million in profits every year compared to what is currently in place. So we don't think it makes sense that AES be rewarded with additional profit margin on top of the very healthy profit margin, especially in the context of the affordability crisis we're facing here, and particularly with our utility bills. What you can see also in this graph is that if the Utility Commission authorized a lower profit margin, a lower return on equity, that would mean a much lower potential rate increase for us as consumers. As you travel down this red dotted line, you can see at different authorized return on equity points what the associated rate increase would be. So the top right of the graph shows AES's proposal. They want this $192 million rate increase here at a 10.7% return on equity. But if we reduce that profit margin down to 5.1%, that would result in a $0 rate increase in this rate case. So this really illustrates the discretion the Utility Commission has to set this profit margin level and to do so in a manner that would help protect consumers from some of these egregiously large rate increases. This slide provides a little bit more information about what's happened in the past compared to what AES is proposing now in different rate cases. It shows you in the middle column what the regulators have approved in terms of a revenue increase to AES in prior examples of rate cases. In 2016, for example, they got a $29 million increase. In the most recent rate case in 2024, it was a $71 million rate increase. That gives you a little bit of context for then comparing how they're proposing the overall rate increase here today, the $192 million divvied up in between the phase 1 and phase 2 rate hikes in 2026 and 2027 of $85 million and $108 million. And in the far right column, you can see that the authorized net operating income, which is a metric that reflects profitability. You can also see that that is significantly increasing across time. Back in 2016, it was only 124 million. What they're proposing in this rate case is by 2027, that would be $417 million. So a very large increase in about a decade's time. Now, this rate increase comes on the heel of some significant challenges to AES's service quality here in Indianapolis. In November of 2023, AES rolled out a new customer information and billing system. And that might sound like a relatively mundane or innocuous task, but this was actually a huge undertaking. Costs, I believe, in the neighborhood of $84 million to make the system upgrade. And it turned out to be an epic disaster. When they rolled out the system, it led to major billing problems for many months on end, where many customers did not receive any bill from AES month after month. Other customers received incorrect bills or had wrong information displayed on their bills. And perhaps most egregiously, we had some customers that actually experienced AES auto-withdrawing from their bank accounts multiple times for the same bill. One customer up to 10 times they got withdrawn their monthly bill amount from their bank account. So we want to emphasize, if this type of situation happens to you, to please follow up the utility, make sure you contact their customer service, try to get it resolved through the utility as quickly as possible. If they do not promptly fix the problem, please contact the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission to file a complaint. It's important that we have that information and that data showing customers are getting wrong billing, and that the commission doesn't have the wrong impression that everything is fixed if problems are still ongoing. So I think this paints a picture of some of the challenges that AES has had in terms of actually providing good quality service to Hoosiers. And it calls into question whether or not this rate increase is really warranted if they're facing this type of challenge, rolling out their basic customer information system. We've also seen some reliability challenges with AES Indiana, and that's also contributing to some of the rising costs in this case. We've had some major storms, and some of these storms have taken quite a bit of time for AES to actually be able to restore customers, to help them get out of the power outage and restore their power. In fact, in this past year, we saw that the wait time after a major storm to restore power was almost 3.5 times longer than it was in the 3 prior years on average. So it's taking a lot longer for them to restore power once we have a power outage from a major storm. And that's also resulting in some pretty significant cost increases as a result of the cost to fix the grid after a major storm. And then we're also seeing it's not just the major storms themselves, but AES is spending a lot more money on tree trimming or vegetation management services. In 2022, the authorized level for their distribution tree trimming was 15 million. Fast forward to today, they're looking to almost triple that amount. $43 million is what they've requested in this case. And perhaps what's most frustrating about that very large increase is that they're actually proposing to decrease the amount of lines they trim in this rate case compared to what they were authorized in the past. So you would think with greater resources to do this tree trimming, they would be improving reliability. But what we're seeing in this latest proposal is that it would reduce the frequency with which these trees were trimmed. And then onto the transmission and distribution spending. I won't go into super detail here. I'll just note that it has significantly increased for AES Indiana. We're seeing the operations and maintenance costs roughly double in recent years compared to where it was historically. And we're seeing that the amount they're spending on the capital investment, the new grid investments they're making, has nearly quadrupled relative to recent years. And that quadrupling is largely, or at least significantly driven by one of those laws the General Assembly passed that's anti-consumer. That's the TDSIC law, which is a mouthful and quite an acronym. It's the Transmission, Distribution, Storage System Improvement Charge. Try saying that 5 times fast. But that law gives the utilities the ability to add a surcharge to our bill to charge us for major grid infrastructure plan upgrades that could cost more than $1 billion over a 5 to 7 year period. So it's really driving our utilities to pursue much more gold plating, much bigger spending on the grid, regardless of whether or not that's actually driving real results and improving our reliability. And I'll just briefly mention the executive compensation for AES Corporation, as well as the AES Indiana company, has also increased. We are seeing some pretty large increases for some executives. And this raises the question of what should shareholders of the utility pay versus what should we as ratepayers be responsible for paying? What's fair to us? Is it really fair if we are paying millions of dollars to go towards executive compensation when, for example, our own public servants here in Indiana are making much less? For example, the governor's salary is in the neighborhood of $220,000 per year. Do we really need to be paying any investor-owned utility employee more than that to incentivize them to do their job properly? I want to also note that while data centers, the very large data centers that are being driven right now by artificial intelligence have not yet built data centers in the Indianapolis area of this magnitude, there are multiple proposals that are being pushed forward right now as we speak, including a Google data center under consideration in the Franklin Township area in southeast Indianapolis, as well as a data center proposal in the Monrovia area of Morgan County. And so both of these proposals raise a lot of concerns because these data centers could use significant amounts of power. They could use so much power, in fact, that one data center could double the amount of power that AES Indiana needs. And that would result in AES Indiana need to going out to the market, procuring some additional generation resources. And as a result of the large need of data centers being pushing for more power across the country, we're seeing the cost of new generation increase significantly. For example, the cost of a new natural gas plant has more than doubled in just the last 3 years. And so AES has just put out a request for proposal for new natural gas plants that could be used to power some of these data centers. And we're very worried about them following through on this proposal because it could effectively double their carbon emissions relative to a situation where they didn't have these data centers coming to Indianapolis. So it could really set us back on the climate, it could really set us back on affordability, given these very large increases in the cost of power. And finally, I'll just briefly note before passing it over to my colleague Kelly, that AES is considering a sale to an entity, an investor like BlackRock or Brookfield. AES has itself, the corporation, the parent company of AES Indiana, has been struggling financially for a number of years. but a potential sale to one of these types of investors poses potentially even more concerns than it being just an investor-owned utility owned by AES Corporation, such as the profit motor of the buyer that could push for more investment while cutting corners on operating and maintenance costs in order to drive more profit for those investors. It could also reduce transparency and accountability, and it could also reduce the environmental sustainability of AES Indiana if those investors are driving for more fossil fuel investments. With that, let me transition now to pass this over to Kelly. Kelly, why don't you walk us through how folks can get involved in this rate case?
Thank you so much, Ben. And thank you everyone for being with us tonight. We're grateful to have you, and I think we've got plenty of motivation to act. We just need to know how to channel it, which is what we'll touch on now. Kerwin and Ben have mentioned the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, or IURC. And this group is the state agency that will have the final say on what happens with this AES rate hike. They will get to approve, reject, or modify what AES has proposed. It is really important to know that all of these regulators that you see, they are appointed by the governor without any public involvement. So that is why it is so critical that you make your voice heard in the rate case process. This is our chance to connect directly with these regulators. But there are other entities that also get involved in the rate case, other interveners that lawyer up and advocate in this robust process that takes close to a year. There is another state agency called the Office of Utility Consumer Counselor, or OUCC. And what they do is they advocate for all ratepayers in Indiana in cases before the utility regulators. And as Ben mentioned, there are big commercial and industrial customers. The OUCC is representing them as well as residential customers. Just like the IURC, the head of this agency is also appointed by the governor, so not accountable to the public directly. The OUCC does lead public field hearings that we're going to talk about in just a bit. And when you submit written comments or verbal comments at the field hearing, the OUCC takes those and submits your comments as evidence in this rate case, which is another reason why it's so critical that you make your voice heard. Because other groups are certainly making their voice heard, including large industrial customers that kind of band together as the industrial group, and they've got a lawyer and they advocate for their wants, which, as Ben pointed out, if AES's proposal is approved as is, they would have a much smaller increase than what we pay as residential customers. Other interveners are also big commercial customers like Kroger and Walmart. The city of Indianapolis obviously has a pretty significant streetlight bill. And then, of course, CAC also intervenes in the rate case, and we do our darndest to fight for you throughout the entire process. We are the only group that's laser focused on residential customers. It is a bit of a David versus Goliath situation, but we don't give up. As you can see, we've got, rate cases are about 300 days. So the deadline for the final order in this case is March, with rates increasing next spring and then January of 2027 after that. If you're having fun tonight virtually, you also are invited to join us next week in person for a town hall where we'll cover the same information and end with a question and answer, but we'll of course get to interact with you directly. So you're invited to join us as well. But you are so critical in this rate case process because, again, utility regulators who will make the final decision, they're hearing a lot from AES. They will be hearing a lot from other interveners like the big companies, so they need to hear from you. You can very easily submit written comments in this case by scanning this QR code here. It takes you to that link, and that link shares basically a pre-form email that you can send off to make your voice heard about this rate increase. The more people that do that, the better. So we appreciate any and all help you can give and getting folks informed about this rate increase and how they can take action. Our website is a wonderful resource with more information about this case and legislation and a lot of issues that are impacting our bills here in Indiana. So please hop over there where you can also sign up for emails and texts. We understand that folks get bombarded, so we try really hard to just reach out when we've got something really important for you. But I bring this up because the legislative session will start in January. And so while it's so important to take action for this AES rate increase right now, we will likely need your voice in the fight again when the legislature is back in session. And the other way that you have to sort of make your voice heard in this rate increase is through the public field hearing process. We do not know the dates and the times and the locations of those yet, but it is so important that folks show up in full force and make their voice heard. And we've got some awesome pictures of different field hearings from around the state over the last couple of years. I will say the center picture is from Evansville, Indiana. The Center Point rate hike field hearing that lasted, I think it was close to 10 hours of testimony. And I'll just say their mayor was the first person who testified in opposition to the rate increase, and she was followed up by county officials and city officials as well. So field hearings give us all a chance to come together and say, our community cannot afford to pay this. We cannot afford to pay for higher profits for AES. We cannot afford to pay for bigger salaries because folks are making really difficult decisions. And already without this rate hike, and it's important for regulators to hear that. And it can be a little bit intimidating, I think, for some folks if you don't know what to expect going into these field hearings, but you are sometimes speaking in front of a big crowd, right? So we've got a couple of tips here for you. It's always good if you can take the time to write down what you want to say, because that will help keep you focused as you're talking in front of the regulators, as well as all folks who have shown up as well. If you can arrive early, that's great. Helps make the process run smoothly, easy for me to say. And then you will, of course, be sworn in as a group if you do plan to testify. When your name is called to speak, if you do want to publicly testify, you've got to spell your name and state it. And then, of course, that's your chance to submit your testimony. Not everyone loves public speaking. So if you don't, it's still great to go to the public field hearings, because the more people are in the room, the more the regulators understand that our community cares about this increase and about our fellow members of our community who are struggling to get by. So again, as soon as the field hearing dates are announced, we'll let everybody know on our social media, through email, and we'd really appreciate your help spreading the word so that folks know how they can make their voice heard. We're going to pivot to the question and answer session in just a second. So I see we've got some good questions coming in here. Thank you so much. We'll make a quick plug before we shift gears here. Please take a quick minute to visit to our website where you can again sign up for emails and text messages so we can keep you in the loop. We also, as Kerwin mentioned at the beginning, your financial support helps keep us going. And it does only take a little bit from a lot of people for us to keep fighting these big companies. But of course, our website will be a central hub of information throughout the rate case process. So we will have this presentation available there, as well as more information about the rate hike and the public field hearings. Okay, so I'm going to pivot and we're going to go into the Q&A. And Kerwin, you're up first. And we're gonna go with this question here. AES is currently trading at 13.15. Where's the money going?
Where is the money going? Well, if you mean by where are the earnings going, that's probably a better question from Ben. But historically speaking, most of the earnings from the Indiana investor-owned electric utilities just go upstream to the energy holding companies that own them. In this case, AES Corporation. So in the past, when we've looked at it, AES Indiana earnings generally go 100% upstream to the holding companies. I don't know if Ben has any flavor or anything else you'd want to add to that.
Yeah, I'll just note, I think maybe this question is also getting at their stock price, and I think it's important we make sure we separate
Okay.
the idea of where the stock price might be trading for their parent company, AES Corporation, from the financial health of AES Indiana, a subsidiary of that overall company. And as we saw, it's even a little more complicated than that because 70% is owned by the corporation, 30% is owned by another entity. So yeah, the AES Corporation itself has struggled financially the past few years. They had a number of years where they weren't making a profit, and that changed in 2024. But I'll just say that we kind of saw, I included in my slide, their declining stock price over time, and it kind of shows that a lot of the investors are worried about that, the financial health of that overall parent company.
Thank you both. Ben, I'll start with you, but Kerwin may want to chip in as well. Why are they pushing for data centers and nuclear? How does this benefit Hoosiers?
Well, it depends on who they is in this question, but I'll assume that the question is aimed at why is the utility, as AES Indiana, trying to recruit them? And from the utility's perspective, a new large customer is a new opportunity to make more revenue and to make more profit. So the utility is always interested in attracting economic development, bringing in more customers, having growth as an opportunity for them to be able to grow their profits into the future. And the state of Indiana might want to attract data centers by passing subsidies for them under the notion that it could be beneficial for economic development. But what we're seeing with data centers is that they could actually stymie economic development by, because they use so much power and provide so few jobs, it could actually prevent large industries that actually have lots of jobs associated with them from being able to site in a utility jurisdiction that has a lot of data centers, because it's going to be so hard to meet that data center energy need. And then why, I believe the other part was about nuclear. Nuclear is another opportunity for a utility to increase their profits. Remember, nuclear is the most expensive type of power plant to build. It has the largest capital cost associated with it, meaning it's also the largest opportunity for them to earn a high profit margin. So I think that's one of the reasons why a utility might consider nuclear. Although I should note that today, at this moment in time, AES Indiana has not announced any plans that they're pursuing nuclear at this moment. Kerwin, would you add anything to that?
Oh, no, I think you pretty much nailed it. But I mean, utilities themselves, this is why utilities are so engaged with the IEDC, Economic Development Corporation, if you will, because utilities make money by selling power and building things, sticking concrete and steel in the ground. And so large manufacturers, large industrial facilities, as Ben pointed out, need power and a lot of it. And so by attracting big business, big industry, what you're doing is inviting investment, spending capital, building expensive things that they make a lot of money on, and then a lot of power to sell to. So it's pretty simple from our perspective. The more money that utilities spend, the more money that they make. In order to spend money, they need customers with demand, and industrial customers, and especially data centers, have extraordinary demand for electricity. It's all about profit.
Money makes the world go round. Thank you. I'm going to hop in and direct this question to Kerwin. Why haven't utilities in Indiana been deregulated? And don't they need competition?
Well, there's no simple answer to the deregulation question, because I can tell you that CAC has historically been pretty opposed to the idea of deregulation and opening up the markets to competition, because deregulation means a lot of different things, and it depends on what you're talking about. And so, yes, we believe strongly that we need some competitive elements into the electric markets in Indiana, and you get competitive elements into the markets in Indiana, number one, by ensuring that regulators are doing their job. They have the flexibility and discretion to serve as their role, which is the primary surrogate to competition against the monopoly utilities who are inherently greedy. Second, CAC worked for years to establish a statewide energy efficiency program, which was realized when Mitch Daniels created Energizing Indiana. Again, programs that help customers control, reduce their costs, ultimately reduce their bills. We worked long and hard years to create a new net metering rule that provided fair compensation for customers, big and small, to install renewable energy on their facilities and do that as well. And there's other ways to create competition. So it's really not as simple as saying, well, if we just deregulated the marketplace, prices would come down, because the challenge is that utility service is an essential service that everybody needs. There's only one grid, there's only one set of water pipes, there's only one set of gas lines. So deregulation means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. However, I think things are so bad in Indiana right now. The utilities have, an extreme legislative and regulatory capture happening in Indiana now for decades. So I think Indiana, despite our opposition to the idea of deregulation doesn't necessarily serve small customers well, certainly has served large customers well, but evidence from other states that have deregulated the residential side of things, there's lots of research that shows costs have actually gone up, especially for low-income customers in those states that have chosen different providers other than their monopoly utilities. Because the monopoly utilities are still the ones sending them bills, they still own the poles, they still own the wires, they still own the meters, and they're still sending electricity and you're still paying them. So that's a very good question, but it's a complicated question. And like I was about to say, despite our decades-long opposition to the idea of deregulation, we do believe, let's have that conversation. It's time to have that conversation. Things are so bad that let's talk about ways in which to increase competition, bring down prices, because we are all being subjected to extreme monopoly pricing in the state of Indiana, and something has to change. I hope that answers your question. But the deregulation conversation, let's also not forget that all deregulating utilities came to a hard stop because of the Enron crisis in California and the manipulation of pricing. So deregulation sounds great conceptually. Boy, I'd love a choice, but in practice, it's very complicated. So it's a long, drawn-out conversation that really should be had, because things are bad enough in Indiana now where, let's start talking about this stuff.
Absolutely. Folks can't afford for us to continue down this path that we've created. Everyone, we so appreciate your time. We've got a lot of questions and we are not going to get through them all this evening. So please rest assured that we will follow up via email as soon as we can. I'm going to take one question real quick and then we're going to end with one more. But I did want to hit on this point. Can you personalize the form letters from CAC? Absolutely. And please do, because regulators need to hear your experience in working to afford your ever-increasing AES bill. Folks make difficult decisions, whether to buy groceries, whether to pay for medicine or their bill, whether to pay rent or their bill. And please edit those letters to share your story, because your story needs to be heard. And then I think I'll kick this to Ben to begin. But this last question is a good one and a tough one. But is there an amount that would be considered a fair rate increase given this proposal?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it's a tough one because fairness is sort of in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? AES has come to the commission with what they think is a fair increase, right? What the proposal for their rate increase in their eyes is perfectly fair and reasonable, because in their opinion, it's what they need to provide a service and have that opportunity to earn that high profit margin that they want. From our perspective, we have a very different perspective on what would be fair for consumers. I think what we can agree on now is that our bills are going up fast and they're getting out of control, and customers don't have the tools to take control of those bills. And particularly vulnerable customers, low-income households, folks on fixed incomes, we don't have the policies and protections in place. And so a lot of those types of folks are getting left behind and are struggling particularly with affordability. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that our existing rates, what we're paying today, might not be fair. And depending on how you view that question of fairness. Kerwin, would you add anything or modify anything I said there?
No, these are excellent but difficult questions to answer because, yeah, fairness is in the eye of the beholder. And I think ultimately, you know, CAC would view fairness as folks being able to afford their monthly utility bills. We shouldn't be asking people to do the impossible for what is an essential human service. And I would even include things like healthcare, housing, and food in those as well. We shouldn't be asking people to do something that they cannot do, especially considering, you know, two things. Number one, these are monopolies. Customers have absolutely no choice from where to get these services, and folks only have so much money. So I think the idea of fairness would be, we talk about affordability all the time. Both sides of the political aisle talk about affordability all the time. Yet we haven't defined what affordability means necessarily, but we do know what unaffordable is. So something fair would be, let's start making sure that bills and rates that folks can afford to pay what they are being asked to pay for what is an essential human services, which is necessary for folks to participate meaningfully in day-to-day society. So that would be my answer. What would be fair is that all Hoosier households have continual, uninterrupted access to essential human services. So let's have a conversation about what that means and how we get there, because Wall Street is doing pretty well right now, but Main Street is struggling. So what we do know is what's happening today is not fair. So let's have an honest, open, and transparent conversation, bring some fairness to this discussion, and ensure that folks have quality and dignity of life.
Beautifully said. Wow, everyone, we are so grateful that you joined us tonight. We are so grateful that you asked such wonderful questions. Thank you for being here, and thank you for helping us push back against this really huge rate increase. Keep your eyes peeled. We will, of course, share the presentation slides and a recording of this webinar in as soon as we can. But we're so grateful for your help, and we'd love to see you next week right next to our office if you'd like to join us in person for our town hall on Wednesday the 6th. But thank you so much for joining us tonight. Everybody take good care.